Mindset Shift Audiobooks. Why Empaths Attract Narcissists. Breaking Free from Toxic Patterns. Welcome to Mindset Shift Audiobooks, a place for becoming. Here you'll find the structure to build more abundance, more success, more life lived on your terms. If this resonates, subscribe for daily content. Let's begin. There's a pattern you might have noticed in your relationships. A pattern where you give everything, your time, your energy, your empathy, your care, and somehow you end up drained, confused, questioning your own reality. You attracted someone who seemed magnetic at first, intense, present, like they really saw you, and you felt special, chosen, like you'd finally found someone who matched your depth. But over time, something shifted. The intensity that felt like love started to feel like control. The attention that felt affirming started to feel suffocating. And the person who once made you feel seen started making you feel invisible. You stayed longer than you should have. You made excuses. You told yourself it would get better. You believed that if you just loved them harder, understood them deeper, gave them more, they would change. But they didn't. And when you finally left, or when they discarded you, you were left with a question that haunted you. Why did I attract this? And why do I keep attracting this? Because if it happened once, you might have chalked it up to bad luck. But if it's happened multiple times, different people, same pattern, then it's not about them. It's about something in you, not something wrong with you, but something unhealed, something unresolved, some part of you that's still operating from a wound that narcissistic people can sense and exploit. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to understand, because empaths and narcissists are drawn to each other for very specific reasons. And until you understand the dynamic, you'll keep recreating it. This audiobook is about that dynamic. It's about why kindness becomes a liability when boundaries are absent. It's about why you ignored the red flags even when you saw them. It's about the psychology of emotional manipulation and how empathy gets weaponized against you. It's about trauma bonds, emotional hooks, and why leaving felt impossible even when you knew you had to. And most importantly, it's about how to break the pattern, how to detach without guilt, how to reclaim your power, how to rebuild your identity after emotional control, how to learn to trust yourself again, because you can heal from this. You can become unavailable to toxic patterns. You can learn to use your empathy as a strength instead of a liability. But first, you have to understand what happened and why. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Understanding the Empath Narcissist. Dynamic. Empaths and narcissists are opposite ends of the same spectrum, and they're magnetically drawn to each other, not because empaths are weak, not because narcissists are strong, but because each has something the other needs. The narcissist needs supply, validation, attention, emotional energy, someone who will reflect back the image they want to see, someone who will absorb their pain without demanding accountability. The empath needs to be needed, to heal, to fix, to believe in someone's potential, to give love so deeply that it transforms the other person. And in the beginning, it feels perfect. The narcissist showers the empath with attention. Intense, focused, overwhelming attention. It feels like love. It feels like being seen. It feels like finally meeting someone who matches your depth. And the empath gives freely, because that's what empaths do. They see the wounded child beneath the bravado. They see the pain beneath the charm, and they believe that if they just love hard enough, they can heal it. But here's what the empath doesn't realize. Narcissists don't want to be healed. They want to be validated. And there's a difference. Healing requires vulnerability, self-awareness, accountability, a willingness to look at the parts of yourself that are broken and do the work to repair them. Narcissists don't do that. They externalize, they blame, they project. They create a reality where they're always the victim or the hero, and everyone else is the problem. And the empath, who is wired to understand, to empathize, to give the benefit of the doubt, gets trapped in that reality. Because narcissists are master manipulators, not always consciously, but instinctively. They know how to identify empaths. They know how to mirror what the empath wants. They know how to create a fantasy that feels like destiny. This is called love bombing, and it's the first phase of the cycle. The narcissist comes on strong. They're attentive. They're affectionate. They make you feel like you're the most important person in the world. They say things like, "I've never felt this way before," or "You're different from everyone else," or "I feel like I've known you my whole life." And the empath, who has probably felt misunderstood or unseen in other relationships, finally feels like they've found someone who gets them. But it's not real, it's a strategy. And once the narcissist knows they have you hooked, the dynamic shifts. The attention becomes conditional, the affection becomes sporadic. The person who was once obsessed with you suddenly becomes distant, critical, unpredictable. And the empath, desperate to get back to the version of the person they fell in love with, tries harder, gives more, sacrifices more. This is the trap, and it's where the real damage begins. Because the more the empath gives, the more the narcissist takes. And the more the narcissist takes, the more the empath depletes, until the empath is a shell of who they used to be, anxious, confused, constantly walking on eggshells, questioning their own reality. This is the empath-narcissist dynamic, and it's not love, it's exploitation. But here's the part that's hard to hear. The empath participates in the dynamic, not because they're weak, not because they're naive, but because something in them believes that their worth is tied to how much they can give, how much they can endure, how much they can save someone else. And until that belief is healed, the pattern will repeat. Chapter 2. When kindness becomes a liability. Kindness is not the problem. Kindness is a strength. But kindness without boundaries is a liability. And that's what narcissists exploit. Because empaths are kind by nature. They see the best in people. They give second chances. They forgive. They believe in potential. They lead with compassion. And in healthy relationships, this is beautiful. It creates connection. It builds trust. It allows people to feel safe enough to be vulnerable. But in relationships with narcissists, kindness becomes a weapon used against you. Here's how. You see them struggling and you want to help. So you give your time, your energy, your resources. You make excuses for their behavior. You tell yourself they're just going through a hard time, that they'll change once things get better. But they don't change. They just learn that you'll tolerate more. You set a boundary and they violate it. But instead of holding the boundary, you soften. You give them another chance because you're kind, because you don't want to be harsh, because you believe people deserve grace. And the narcissist learns that your boundaries are negotiable. You express your needs and they dismiss them. They tell you you're too sensitive, too demanding, too much. And because you're kind, you question yourself. Maybe they're right. Maybe you are asking for too much. And the narcissist learns that they can gaslight you into doubting your own reality. This is how kindness becomes a liability, not because kindness is wrong, but because kindness without discernment is dangerous. Healthy people respect your kindness. They don't exploit it. They don't take more than they give. They don't use your empathy as a tool to manipulate you. But narcissists do, because they're not operating from reciprocity. They're operating from extraction. They extract your energy, your attention, your validation, your resources, and they give back just enough to keep you hooked, just enough to make you believe that if you try a little harder, give a little more, they'll finally become the person you need them to be. But they won't, because the version of them you fell in love with was never real. It was a mask, a performance, a mirroring of what you wanted to see. Chapter 2: When kindness becomes a liability, and the real person, the one who dismisses your needs, violates your boundaries, blames you for their behavior, that's who they actually are. So how do you stop kindness from becoming a liability? You pair it with boundaries. Boundaries are not mean. They're not selfish. They're not unkind. Boundaries are the structure that allows kindness to be sustainable. You can be kind and still say no. You can be compassionate and still walk away. You can see someone's pain and still refuse to absorb it. This is discerning kindness, and it's what protects you from exploitation, because narcissists can only exploit unlimited access. If you limit access, they lose power. They can only manipulate you if you stay engaged. If you disengage, they lose control. They can only drain you if you keep giving. If you stop giving, they move on. This is not cruelty. This is self-preservation, and it's necessary because your kindness is valuable. It should be given to people who honor it, not to people who exploit it. So the next time you feel yourself giving to someone who only takes, pause. Ask yourself, is this person respecting my kindness, or are they exploiting it? If it's the latter, it's time to set a boundary, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if they call you selfish, even if they try to make you feel guilty. Because protecting your energy is not selfish, it's survival. Chapter 3: Why you ignored the red flags. Let's be honest, you saw the red flags. You did. Maybe not all of them, maybe not clearly at first. But there were moments, small moments, where something felt off. They said something that didn't sit right. They reacted in a way that felt disproportionate. They made a promise and didn't follow through. They talked about their ex in a way that felt unsettling. You noticed, but you ignored it. Not because you're stupid, not because you're naive, but because you wanted to believe in them, and because they gave you reasons to ignore it. They apologized. They explained. They made you feel like you were overreacting. They love-bombed you back into compliance, and you let them, because the good moments felt so good that you convinced yourself the bad moments were anomalies. But they weren't. They were patterns. And the reason you ignored them is because of something deeper, something that has nothing to do with them and everything to do with you. You ignored the red flags because you've been conditioned to ignore your own intuition. Maybe you grew up in an environment where your feelings were dismissed, where you were told you were too sensitive, where you learned that other people's comfort mattered more than your own boundaries. Maybe you've been taught, implicitly or explicitly, that love requires sacrifice, that if you're not struggling, you're not really committed, that relationships are supposed to be hard. Maybe you've internalized the belief that you're responsible for other people's emotions, that if someone is upset, it's your job to fix it, that if someone is struggling, you're supposed to stay and help. These beliefs create blind spots, and narcissists exploit those blind spots. Because when you've been conditioned to distrust your own intuition, you look outside yourself for validation. You ask, is this okay? Is this normal? Am I overreacting? And the narcissist, who is skilled at manipulating reality, tells you, you're overreacting, you're too sensitive, you're imagining things. And because you've already been conditioned to doubt yourself, you believe them. This is gaslighting, and it's one of the most insidious forms of emotional manipulation. Because it doesn't just make you question the relationship, it makes you question yourself, your perception, your memory, your sanity. And once you start doubting yourself, the narcissist has complete control. Here's the other reason you ignored the red flags. You were invested. You'd already spent time, energy, emotion. You'd already built a story in your head about who this person could be. You'd already envisioned a future. Chapter 3. Why you ignored the red flags. And walking away meant admitting that you were wrong, that you wasted time, that the fantasy wasn't real, and that felt harder than staying. So you ignored the red flags, you made excuses, you gave them the benefit of the doubt. You told yourself it would get better, but it didn't, because red flags don't go away, they multiply, and the longer you ignore them, the harder it becomes to leave, because now you're not just invested, you're trauma bonded. So how do you stop ignoring red flags in the future? First, you rebuild trust in your intuition. You start paying attention to the feelings that come up in your body when something feels off, the tightness in your chest, the knot in your stomach, the subtle sense that something isn't right. That's not anxiety, that's wisdom. And instead of dismissing it, you honor it, you investigate it, you ask yourself, what is this trying to tell me? Second, you stop making excuses for other people's behavior. You stop filling in the gaps with generous interpretations. You stop giving people credit for potential instead of holding them accountable for reality. If someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Third, you recognize that walking away from an investment is not a loss, it's a redirection. The time you spent was not wasted, it was data. It taught you what you don't want, what you won't tolerate, what red flags look like, and that's valuable. So the next time you see a red flag, don't ignore it, don't minimize it, don't rationalize it. Pause, investigate, and if it's a pattern, walk away. You don't need more evidence. You don't need to give them another chance. You don't need to see how bad it gets. You just need to trust yourself enough to leave before it gets worse. Chapter 4. The Psychology of Emotional Manipulation. Emotional manipulation is not always obvious. It doesn't always look like yelling, threats, or violence. Sometimes it's subtle. So subtle that you don't even realize it's happening until you're already caught. And by the time you recognize it, you're so deep in the fog that you can't see your way out. So let's break down the psychology of how it works, because understanding the mechanics is how you protect yourself from falling into it again. Manipulation Tactic 1: Love bombing. This is the setup. The narcissist showers you with affection, attention, gifts, promises. They make you feel like you're the center of their universe. And it feels intoxicating, because it's not just attention, it's intensity. It's texts all day. It's grand gestures. It's "I love you" within weeks. It's future planning before you've even established a foundation. And the empath, who craves depth and connection, interprets this as destiny, as true love. But it's not love. It's a strategy. The narcissist is creating an emotional high, a baseline of intensity that will later be used as leverage, because once you're addicted to that high, they can control you by withholding it. Manipulation. Tactic 2: Intermittent reinforcement. After love bombing, the narcissist pulls back. They become distant, cold, unpredictable, and you're confused. What happened? Where did they go? What did I do wrong? So you try harder. You give more. You chase the version of them you fell in love with. And occasionally, just when you're about to give up, they give you a hit of the love bombing again. A sweet text, a romantic gesture, a moment of the person you remember. And you think, see, they're still in there. It's going to be okay. But it's not. This is intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same psychology used in gambling. You don't know when the reward is coming, so you keep playing, you keep giving, you keep hoping, because the unpredictability creates an addictive cycle. Manipulation Tactic 3: Gaslighting. You bring up something that hurts you, a boundary they violated, a promise they broke, and instead of acknowledging it, they deny it. That never happened. You're remembering it wrong. You're too sensitive. You're making a big deal out of nothing. And because you want to believe them, because you don't want to think they're lying, you start doubting yourself. Maybe I am remembering it wrong. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am overreacting. This is gaslighting, and it's designed to make you distrust your own perception so that you rely on theirs. Manipulation Tactic 4: Triangulation. They bring up other people to make you feel jealous, insecure, or replaceable. My ex never had a problem with this. Other people think you're being unreasonable. Someone at work was flirting with me today. And you feel threatened, like you're in competition, like you have to prove your worth. This is triangulation, and it's designed to keep you off balance, to make you try harder to win their approval. Manipulation Tactic 5: Blame shifting. You confront them about their behavior, and somehow, by the end of the conversation, you're the one apologizing. They flip it. They make it about your tone, your timing, your reaction. They position themselves as the victim and you as the aggressor, and you end up feeling guilty for even bringing it up. This is blame shifting, and it's how narcissists avoid accountability. These tactics work because they're subtle. They don't happen all at once. They're layered, and by the time you realize what's happening, you're already emotionally dependent. So how do you protect yourself? You learn to recognize the patterns. You name them when they show up, and you refuse to participate. When someone love bombs you, you slow down. You don't get swept up in the intensity. You observe their behavior over time. When someone uses intermittent reinforcement, you recognize it for what it is, manipulation, and you stop chasing. When someone gaslights you, you trust your perception. You don't argue. You just note that your realities don't align, and you walk away. When someone triangulates, you refuse to compete. You don't fight for someone's attention. You let them go. When someone blame shifts, you don't defend yourself. You simply restate the boundary and disengage if it's violated. This is how you break free from emotional manipulation, not by trying to change them, but by refusing to play the game. Chapter 5. When empathy is exploited. Empathy is one of the most beautiful human capacities. It's the ability to feel with someone, to understand their pain, to hold space for their experience. But empathy, when misdirected, becomes a trap. Because narcissists don't just want empathy, they want you to absorb their emotions, to take responsibility for their feelings, to manage their inner world so they don't have to. And empaths, who are wired to attune to others, fall into this role without realizing it's not their job. Here's how empathy gets exploited. The narcissist shares their pain, their trauma, their difficult childhood, their struggles, and the empath listens deeply. They feel the narcissist's pain as if it's their own. They want to help, to heal, to fix, and the narcissist lets them, because this is exactly what they need. Someone to carry the weight of their emotions without having to do the work themselves. So the empath becomes the emotional caretaker, the therapist, the savior, and the narcissist becomes the eternal victim, the one who's always suffering, always misunderstood, always in need of rescue. And the empath stays, because they believe that if they just love hard enough, the narcissist will heal, that their empathy will be the thing that transforms this person. But it won't, because the narcissist isn't looking to heal. They're looking for someone to manage their emotions for them. And as long as the empath is willing to do that, the narcissist will let them. This is emotional exploitation, and it's exhausting. Because you're not just managing your own emotions, you're managing theirs too. You're constantly scanning their mood, adjusting your behavior to keep them regulated, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering them. And over time, you lose yourself. Your needs become secondary. Your emotions become inconvenient. Your entire existence revolves around keeping them stable. And when you finally can't do it anymore, when you're depleted, burned out, resentful, the narcissist doesn't take responsibility. They blame you. You're abandoning me. You never really cared. You're just like everyone else. And the empath feels guilty, like they failed, like they should have tried harder. But you didn't fail. You were exploited. And there's a difference between supporting someone and becoming responsible for their emotional regulation. Support is, I see you're struggling, how can I help? Exploitation is, I'm struggling and it's your job to fix it. Support is reciprocal. Exploitation is one-sided. Support has boundaries. Exploitation has none. So how do you stop your empathy from being exploited? First, you recognize that you are not responsible for other people's emotions. You can witness them, you can hold space, but you cannot fix them. Second, you notice when empathy becomes codependency, when you're sacrificing your own well-being to manage someone else's feelings, when you're more invested in their healing than they are. Third, you set boundaries around emotional labor. You can care about someone without carrying them. You can empathize without absorbing. And fourth, You let people experience the consequences of their own behavior. You stop rescuing. You stop making excuses. You stop enabling. Because real healing doesn't come from being saved. It comes from taking responsibility. And as long as you're doing the work for them, they'll never do it for themselves. So you step back. You release the burden that was never yours. And you redirect your empathy toward people who honor it. Because your empathy is a gift, and it should be given to people who use it to grow, not to people who use it to avoid accountability. Chapter 6: Learning to Detach Without Guilt. One of the hardest parts of leaving a narcissistic relationship is the guilt. You feel guilty for walking away, guilty for not trying harder, guilty for giving up on them. And the narcissist reinforces this guilt. They tell you you're selfish, that you're abandoning them, that you never really loved them. And because you're an empath, because you care deeply, because you don't want to hurt anyone, you internalize that guilt. You carry it like a weight. But here's the truth. Detachment is not cruelty. It's self-preservation. And you don't owe anyone access to you at the expense of your own well-being. Let's reframe detachment. Because it's not about being cold. It's not about shutting down. It's not about cutting people off out of anger. Detachment is the conscious choice to stop absorbing someone else's chaos, to stop making their problems your responsibility, to stop letting their emotions dictate your peace. It's saying, I care about you, but I will not destroy myself to save you. And that's not selfish, that's healthy, because you can't help anyone from an empty place. You can't love someone into healing if you're depleted. You can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed, and trying to do so doesn't make you noble. It makes you complicit in a dynamic that's destroying you both. So how do you detach without guilt? First, you accept that you are not responsible for their healing. That was never your job, and staying doesn't help them, it enables them. Second, you recognize that guilt is a manipulation tactic. The narcissist uses your guilt to keep you engaged, to keep you giving, to keep you trapped. And as long as you're responding to the guilt, you're still under their control. So you stop responding to it, you notice it, you acknowledge it, and you choose differently. I feel guilty, and I'm leaving anyway. Third, you give yourself permission to prioritize your own well-being, not in a selfish way, but in a survival way. Because if you stay, you will lose yourself, and losing yourself doesn't serve anyone. Fourth, you understand that detachment is not the same as indifference. You can still care about someone and choose not to engage with them. You can wish them well from a distance. You can hope they find healing, but you don't have to be the one to facilitate it. And finally, you trust that walking away is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for them and for you. Because staying in a toxic dynamic doesn't help anyone grow. It just keeps both people stuck. And sometimes the only way for someone to hit rock bottom and actually do the work is for you to stop catching them. So you detach, not with anger, not with resentment, but with clarity and boundaries. You stop engaging in the arguments. You stop defending yourself. You stop trying to make them understand. You just step back. You protect your energy, and you let them figure it out on their own. And you do it without guilt, because you've done enough. Chapter 7: Why you felt responsible for their healing. Let's talk about why you felt like it was your job to heal them. Because this is one of the deepest traps in the empath-narcissist dynamic. The belief that if you just love them enough, understand them enough, support them enough, they'll change. but they won't. And here's why you believed they would. You saw their potential. You saw beneath the mask. You saw the wounded child, the pain, the trauma. And you believed that if someone just loved them correctly, they could heal. And you wanted to be that person, the one who saves them, the one who sees them when no one else does, the one whose love is transformative. This is not because you're codependent, it's because you're empathetic, and empaths are wired to heal. But here's the problem. You can't heal someone who doesn't want to heal themselves. You can offer support, you can hold space, you can provide resources, but you cannot do the work for them. And narcissists don't want to do the work, because doing the work requires vulnerability, self-awareness, accountability, a willingness to look at the parts of themselves that are broken. And narcissists can't do that, because their entire identity is built on the illusion of perfection, on being the victim, on blaming everyone else. So they don't heal, they just find new people to extract from. And you, believing that you're special, that your love is different, stay longer than you should. You sacrifice more than is healthy. You tolerate behavior that violates your boundaries, all because you believe it's your responsibility to heal them. But it's not. Their healing is their responsibility, not yours. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop carrying a burden that was never yours. Here's the other reason you felt responsible. You were conditioned to be. Maybe you grew up in a family where you were the peacemaker, the caretaker, the one who managed everyone else's emotions. Maybe you learned that love equals sacrifice, that if you're not suffering, you're not really committed. Maybe you internalized the belief that your worth is tied to how much you can give, how much you can endure, how much you can fix. And the narcissist activated that conditioning. They positioned themselves as the person who needs you, who can't survive without you, who will finally be okay if you just stay. And you believed them. But that's not love. That's manipulation. Real love doesn't require you to destroy yourself. Real love is reciprocal. Real love involves two people who are both committed to their own healing and growth. And if you're the only one doing the work, it's not a relationship. It's a rescue mission. So how do you release the belief that you're responsible for their healing? First, you acknowledge that you were operating from a wound, a belief that your value comes from what you can do for others, and you start healing that wound. You start building worth that's independent of your utility. Second, you accept that you can't save anyone. You can support, you can witness, but you can't do the work for them. And trying to do so is actually disempowering, because it sends the message that they're not capable, that they need you to function. Third, you redirect that healing energy toward yourself, because if you've been pouring into someone else for months or years, you're depleted, and you deserve the same care, attention, and effort that you've been giving to them. So you stop, you step back, and you focus on your own healing, not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that their healing is not your responsibility and yours is. Chapter 8. Breaking Free from Trauma Bonds. Trauma bonds are not love, but they feel like it, because trauma bonds create intensity, and intensity feels like connection, but it's not. It's addiction. Let me explain. A trauma bond forms when there's a cycle of abuse followed by intermittent positive reinforcement. The narcissist hurts you, then they love bomb you, then they hurt you again, then they apologize, then they pull away, then they come back, and your nervous system gets stuck in this cycle. You're constantly in fight or flight mode, constantly anxious, constantly scanning for their mood, constantly trying to get back to the good moments. And the highs feel so high because the lows are so low. The relief you feel when they're nice to you again is so intense that it creates a chemical response in your brain. Dopamine, oxytocin, the same chemicals released during drug use, the same chemicals that create addiction. And that's what a trauma bond is, an addiction to the cycle. This is why leaving is so hard, because your brain is chemically attached to the pattern. And even though you know logically that the relationship is toxic, emotionally you're hooked. So how do you break a trauma bond? First, you understand that what you're feeling is not love, it's withdrawal. When you go no contact, your body goes through withdrawal. You crave them, you miss them, you want to reach out. But that's not because they're good for you. It's because your nervous system is addicted to the cycle, and the only way to break the addiction is to go through the withdrawal, fully, without giving in. Second, you remove all access. No contact means no contact. No checking their social media. No responding to texts. No, just one more conversation. Because every time you engage, you reset the clock. You give your brain another hit, and the bond strengthens. Third, you replace the bond with something healthier. You can't just remove the narcissist and leave a void. You have to fill that space with relationships, activities, and practices that regulate your nervous system. Therapy, support groups, movement, nature, creative expression, healthy friendships. These things rewire your brain. They teach your nervous system that safety and connection don't require chaos. Fourth, you process the grief. Because even though the relationship was toxic, there's still loss. Loss of the fantasy, loss of the potential, loss of the version of them you fell in love with. And you have to grieve that, fully, without rushing it. But here's what's important. You grieve without romanticizing. You don't rewrite history. You don't minimize the harm. You don't convince yourself it wasn't that bad. You acknowledge the good and the bad. And you accept that even though there were good moments, the overall pattern was harmful, and you let it go. Fifth, you give yourself time. Trauma bonds don't break overnight. It takes months, sometimes longer, and there will be moments where you backslide, where you want to reach out, where you miss them so intensely it feels unbearable. And in those moments, you remind yourself, this is withdrawal, this is not love, this will pass. And it does, every time. And eventually, the cravings get quieter. The memories lose their charge, and you realize you're free, not just from them, but from the pattern. Chapter 9, Reclaiming Power After Emotional Manipulation. When you leave a narcissistic relationship, you don't just leave a person, you leave a version of yourself, the version that tolerated disrespect, that ignored red flags, that gave endlessly without receiving, that shrunk to make someone else comfortable. And reclaiming your power is not about becoming hard. It's about becoming whole. It's about rebuilding the parts of you that were eroded, the boundaries that were violated, the self-trust that was shattered, the identity that was lost. So how do you reclaim your power? Step 1, you stop seeking closure from them. Closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from you. You don't need them to admit what they did. You don't need them to apologize. You don't need them to acknowledge your pain. You just need to decide that you're done. And you give yourself closure by walking away and not looking back. Step 2, you rebuild your identity outside of the relationship. Who were you before them? What did you love? What did you value? What made you feel alive? Go back to those things. Reconnect with the parts of yourself that got buried and start building a new identity, not based on who you were with them, but based on who you want to become. Step 3. You set non-negotiable boundaries. You decide what you will and will not tolerate, and you hold those boundaries without guilt. No more giving people unlimited chances. No more making excuses for bad behavior. No more tolerating disrespect in the name of kindness. You protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. Step 4. You learn to trust yourself again. The narcissist made you doubt your intuition, your perception, your reality, and rebuilding that trust takes time. But you start by listening to the small signals, the gut feelings, the moments when something doesn't feel right. And instead of dismissing them, you honor them, you investigate them, you act on them. And over time, you learn that you can trust yourself, that your intuition was right all along. Step 5. You stop giving your power away. You stop waiting for other people to validate you. You stop seeking permission. You stop looking outside yourself for worth. You decide that you are enough, and you live from that place. Reclaiming your power is not loud, it's quiet. It's the daily practice of choosing yourself, of honoring your needs, of protecting your peace, and it's the most important work you'll ever do. Conclusion. You didn't attract a narcissist because something is wrong with you. You attracted them because you have something valuable: empathy, compassion, depth, care, and they exploited it. But now you know. You know the patterns, you know the tactics, you know why it happened, and you know how to make sure it doesn't happen again. Because healing from narcissistic abuse is not just about leaving the person, it's about understanding why you stayed, why you tolerated, why you ignored the red flags. And it's about doing the deeper work, the work of healing the wounds that made you vulnerable to exploitation in the first place. The wound that says your worth is tied to how much you give. The wound that says you're responsible for other people's emotions. The wound that says love requires suffering. Those wounds are what kept you trapped, and healing them is what sets you free. So you do the work, you rebuild your boundaries, you reclaim your power, you learn to trust yourself again, and you become unavailable to toxic patterns, not because you're hard, not because you're closed off, but because you finally understand that your empathy is a gift, and it should be given to people who honor it, not to people who exploit it. And when you operate from that place, when you pair your empathy with boundaries, your kindness with discernment, you become magnetic to healthy relationships, to people who give as much as they take, to people who respect your boundaries, to people who see your worth and honor it, because you're no longer available for anything less. And that's the real transformation. Not just leaving the narcissist, but becoming someone who would never attract one again, because you've healed the wound that made you vulnerable, and you've stepped into a version of yourself that's whole. And from that place, you build a life that's aligned, that's peaceful, that's yours, not because someone gave it to you, but because you reclaimed it. Thank you for listening, and if this resonated, subscribe for more audiobooks on money, identity, and building a life that belongs to you. You can find them at moneyfamuse.com. Thank you for your support. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.